We're ready.
Okay, we're ready to open the meeting. Janine, you want to start roll call?
Roll call. Mr. Catalini?
Here.
Mr. Strathoff?
Here.
Mr. Rodriguez?
Here.
Mr. Leonard?
Here.
Mr. Zeppelin?
Present.
Mrs. Urbana?
Here.
Mr. Walters?
Here.
Chairwoman Getchell?
Here.
Adequate notice of this meeting of the Bedminster Township Land Use Board is filed with the Township Clerk and sent to the Bernardsville News and the Courier News and to all subscribers and posted at the Township Municipal Building, 1 Miller Lane, Bedminster, New Jersey, on January 16, 2020.
Okay, please stand for the flag salute. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we don't have any homework to do here, but should we talk about anything that's still pending, Paul? or-
If we could, just briefly on the pending applications, we have Lamington River Farms, which is Fiddler's Elbow, which is on for April 2nd. Bedminster Farms, that application is not yet complete. They're in front of the Board of Health again next week. So there'll be a status after that. And the last one on the list there is Old Farm Orchards. You remember that's a cidery up on 206. They just submitted an application for a sign variance. I've done a preliminary review through it. It's my opinion that we can probably deal with it for completeness and a hearing the same night as Lamington River Farms. So I would suggest that we schedule it that way because it's not a big application. We recently saw the full site plan, and this is just for a sign.
Okay, are we going to schedule for the first in April? Or
Yes,
you're-
April. I would say April 2nd.
Okay, good.
That way we can get two done then.
Okay, good. All right, and we can go right to our hearing. Mr. Ware?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, members of the board, members of the professional
I'll
staff,
get back.
members of the public. My name is Jeff Lehrer. I'm representing the applicant Elite at Bedminster LLC, and the property is 2435 Lamington Road, Lot 18, Block 27. As you're aware, we are seeking preliminary final site plan approval and variance relief to construct a mixed-use development on the site. We last appeared before this board on about exactly 3 months ago. Actually, it was December 12 of 2019. At that hearing, my client had agreed to reduce the number of overall units from 40 to 33. The board did not vote that night. Rather, they asked that we return with some plans showing the difference in the height and the massing of the two buildings with the reduced unit count. The revised plans were hand-delivered to the board on February 20, 2020. In summary, the revised plans now show, number one, 33 units total, 18 in the western building, also identified as building number 2 on the plans, and 15 units on the eastern building, also identified as building number 1 on the plans. A slight increase in the retail space of 850 square feet is included for a total of 4,850 square feet versus the 4,000 square feet that existed in the original plan. Number 3, the number of parking spaces has been reduced from 99 overall spaces to 87 overall spaces, with 14 of those spaces underground in the westerly building versus 21 which were shown on the original plan, and 27 underground spaces in the easterly building versus 36 which were shown in the original plan. The revised plan shows 46 outdoor spaces versus 42 which were shown on the original plan. The A7 parking spaces is fully compliant with the RSIS and with your parking ordinance. There has been a 19.7% reduction in the massing of the westerly building and a 22.3% reduction in the massing of the easterly building. The outdoor patio area has been relocated and is now on the westerly side of building number 1. And it's no longer in the rear of the westerly building. The side yard distances have been increased. The maximum lot coverage and maximum building coverage have been reduced. The maximum total floor area of the building has been reduced by 5,113 square feet. The height of the building has been reduced from 49.43 feet for the westerly building to 45.5 feet, and from 42.68 feet to 41 feet for the easterly building. The same significant landscape buffer is proposed to be preserved and supplemented in the rear of the site as was testified to in prior hearings. The buildings are still pushed toward Lamington Road and away from the rear portion of the site as originally existed. It was our position then, and it is our position now, that this site is particularly suited for this mixed-use development. In summary, all conditions about this site which have been raised by the board or by the public during the course of the prior 4 hearings are either staying the same or are being improved. I'll only be putting on for a brief period of time the site engineer and the architect, who will briefly summarize the revisions to the plans. And with that said, Madam Chair, I'll bring on Brett Skapinetz, who did not testify last time. He's with Dynamic Engineering. He is a principal of Dynamic, has testified, and I'll have him sworn and qualified.
Okay. Before we start, I just want to thank the applicant. I want to thank him for listening to the board, listening to our comments, our criticisms, and also our suggestions. I'm glad to see this revision. So if you want to go right ahead, start.
Mr. Skapinetz, can you provide the board with your full name, please?
First, let's swear him in. You swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so be God. And please state your name, spell your last name, and give us an address.
Sure. Name's Brett, B-R-E-T-T, last name Skapinetz, S-K-A-P-I-N-E-T-Z. My business address is 245 Main Street, Suite 110, Chester, New Jersey. And I'm a principal of Dynamic Engineering Consultants.
Mr. Skapinetz, if you could provide the board with just a little bit of your educational and professional background, please.
Mechanical science degree in civil engineering from Rutgers University. Current licensed professional engineer in the state of New Jersey as well as New York and Pennsylvania. Testified before over 130, 40 boards. I actually was before this board 15 years ago, so it's good to be back.
I asked that his credentials as a site engineer be accepted by the board and that he be able to testify as such.
Is there any attorney who has questions on voir dire for the qualifications of Mr. Skapinetz? No. So the board will recognize and accept Mr. Skapinetz as a professional engineer. Please go ahead, gentlemen.
Mr. Skapinetz, just one brief question. You're here because Mr. Jaworski could not make it this evening, correct?
That's correct.
But you've been fully briefed and fully apprised. You're fully familiar with the plans that are before the board.
That's correct.
If what I'd like you to do is just very briefly talk about the changes that have been made to the plan since the last hearing in December.
Right. I'll do so. I have a separate exhibit, which I'll put up.
It's my understanding, Ms. De Leon, that this will be Exhibit A9. When I was reading the transcript, it looked like A9 was inadvertently identified as one of the objectors' exhibits, but I believe it's A9.
Okay. I'll make a note, thank you.
So we're at A9.
A9.
And please put today's date, March 12, 2020.
So the exhibit, the exhibit that I marked A9 is entitled Site Plan Rendering with the preparation
Excuse
date.
me.
Can you turn that a little bit?
Just
towards
like
us?
this way,
Absolutely.
just a little bit.
Yeah. Thank you.
sheet to?
It's entitled Site Plan Rendering, and it's a sheet 1 of 1 with today's date, 3/12/2020, and it's essentially a colorized version of the layout plan that was submitted with the package. Let's see. So Mr. Lehrer actually stole a bunch of my thunder. I'm going to go through though and repeat a handful of those items and the changes that were made, but do it versus the rendering so you can see it visually. So as he noted, I think probably the key thing to note looking at this rendering would be the buildings themselves. You can see that they've essentially been made narrower. Okay, they were longer from an east-west direction or left to right in the page, so they've been made smaller in that direction primarily. They're the same depth from back to front. I want to make note though that the layout around those buildings, the driveway, the parking, the location of the retaining walls, the circular, the roundabout inside the property, that all remains unchanged. That's all exactly per the previous plan. The building locations with respect to the building on the building number 1, that easterly face holds, and it was shortened, bringing it in from the west. What we did on building number 2 is the same thing, bringing it in from the west, and when we did that, you can see where there was limited space in the previous plan, we're now able to maintain the existing tree line and trees that are between us and the westerly property line, they'll stay. The only other change in location of buildings or configuration of the buildings themselves is that building 1 was shifted 3 feet further back, okay, from the roadway. And that was because in the time spent between the last hearing and now, we had received the county comments, and the county's looking for a dedication along the roadway, which we show in this crosshatch area in the plan. It's in your black and white sheet as well. And when we do that, when we place that line off the center line for the dedication that they wanted, it caused some issue with the location where our detention basin was in the front. And so to give clearance between that dedication and the basin, it made sense to shift essentially the basin and the building back 3 feet to give clearance between that and the dedication. But as I said, the wall and the parking back here, that stayed in the same location for the previous plan. So it had no impact on moving those improvements back further into the property.
So the side yard to the west was expanded?
That's right, that
From
increased.
what to what? You know?
It's 45.3 feet right now. It was 16 feet before. So it was,
And again, the westerly building, you did not change the front yard setback, only on the easterly building.
only on the easterly building.
And that was
right.
just 3 feet.
That was just 3 feet.
And then the line on the eastern end of the property, that side yard remains exactly the same?
That remains the same.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So, other changes. So I'll run through. So there was the change in the units, again, total from 40 to 33. Just a little bit more detail to that. That was a loss of 2 one-bedroom units, 4 two-bedroom units, and 1 three-bedroom unit. Again, 2 one-bedrooms, 4 two-bedrooms, and 1 three-bedroom. 850 square feet of additional retail space was added in to building number 2. The total square footage or total loss in floor and footprint area, not, remember we have multi-stories, but the footprint area is 5,133 square feet. Total building coverage, therefore, a reduction of 1.8% overall on the property. The number of spaces, as Mr. Lehrer mentioned, goes from 99 to 87, predominantly with obviously making the footprint smaller, the main losses within and underneath the buildings. The entity, if you recall, the area and the southwest corner of the property, up on the hill, there was the amenity, the patio, pergola. Well, you can see that that's been shifted now between the buildings. So obviously that then has less impact on the existing trees and wooded area on the site. As mentioned by Mr. Lehrer, we're still going to stay consistent, and with the proposed planting of trees in the open area behind that retaining wall, that as specified previously by Mr. Jaworski, that remains part of the plan. And just in general, with this layout, the expectation is that there would be no change in utilities, no change in lighting. I mentioned landscaping obviously stays consistent and doesn't change with the addition of the new trees. Stormwater, there's a reduction in impervious coverage. Our basin, essentially as shown, would still function as previously designed, reported on, and reviewed by Mr. Ferrero. We actually expect to be able to make the basin actually slightly smaller. So right now, if we held the current design, it's slightly over-designed, in my opinion. And
Any further contribution or reduction in the amount of runoff into the street?
well, it will happen, yes. I mean, we have a reduction in impervious coverage, so we have now less runoff coming off this site. We're maintaining more green space on the property, so actually less. I mean, it's a small amount, but look, it's more than what we had in the previous. Okay. And actually, that's it. Those are the changes.
Anybody else on the board have any questions?
Do you have the previous plan you could throw up juxtaposed to that?
Yes. I don't know which the best way to do it. I guess I'll move to the side here. So, Mr. Lehrer is holding exhibit. Let me just make sure we have it. It's A2. So A2, you can. So as we go through, you can see obviously the key is again those lengths of the buildings, the movement of the taking of the amenity from the northeast corner, or southwest corner, and pulling it to the middle, making the buildings narrower. Well, you can see the arrangement of the parking, as I said, and driveway remain consistent.
So in terms of unit reduction, it's a little less than 20%, the 7 on the 40, right?
Right.
But the reduction in the overall square footage of the buildings is right around 20% when you average the two?
Right. Correct.
So it's not only commensurate with the reduction in the units, it's a little bit more than the reduction in units.
Yes.
Anybody else on the
Thank you.
board?
You said the south building moved back 3 feet to accommodate the retention basin?
I'm calling it the east building, the one on the right. Yes, that moved back 3 feet.
And that 3 feet came out of the space,
Uh,
did the building get narrower by 3 feet?
No. The room between the building.
So like the-
That landscape
it.
space.
Yep.
Yeah, we have about between 5 and 10 feet there now, and so we just squeezed that a
shrunk
little.
it down to 5. Okay.
Right, it really doesn't impact the landscaping in there, that 3 feet.
Okay.
Where the patio area is there, where you moved it from the back of the building to the front there, is
Yep.
it possible that you would have room for a little bit of landscaping in front of that, something to buffer it a little bit?
In front?
In the front there, and perhaps it would soften the two buildings a little more?
Yeah, we can look at that. We have a little bit of room right in front of the fence there.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that would, soften the front of the building a little.
We can do that.
And just
It's on that
Just
corner.
in that front, yeah, right there. I
Right,
think
yeah.
that would
We already
be-
have the trees on the one side.
Uh-huh.
We can add a few in the front.
Yeah, just right there. And Nick?
Yeah, on the height issue, putting my little calculation, building number 1 is still 6 foot higher than our
The zone.
design calls for.
Our-
And building number 2 is 10 foot higher.
Our architect can speak a little bit more into the reduction in the height and the changes to the height of the building.
Oh, all right, oh, okay.
Anyone else? No? I'll open it up to the public. Oh, you have, do we have an attorney here? Yes, please. Want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Herschel Rose. I'm an attorney at Jason East Dominoes. I represent the objectors, Christine Thomas and the Tannenbaums. And I just had a couple questions for you. You mentioned the reduction in impervious coverage. Can you explain exactly how much impervious coverage is being reduced?
From a building standpoint, we got the 5,133 square feet. So that's the minimum that we're reducing. We have a slight reduction elsewhere with the reconfiguration
I was wondering
of
about
the now that we're taking the sidewalk and the amenity, and we're essentially bringing it to an area that was between the buildings that was already improved. That's also a reduction. We didn't do a full calculation on the total amount because it's not a bulk requirement in the code for the overall impervious. There's a building coverage requirement, but not a total impervious. But I just, again, based on the numbers for the building itself, it's a minimum of the 5,100 square feet reduction in impervious coverage.
So it's being reduced to 5,100 square feet?
By 5,100 square feet.
And, and in terms of impact to the neighboring properties, when you reduce the buildings by, I forgot exactly how much you said. Would you repeat that again? The reduction in buildings?
Well, look at the footprint. Each building is reduced by about 2,500 square feet each to get to about that 5,100, right? But probably the largest impact of the changing of the footprints is to the westerly side. And you can see that in the plan based on the fact that squeezing of the footprint allows us to maintain more of the natural buffer along that westerly boundary of the property. So you see how there was no existing green. This heavier hatch is the existing tree buffer that's there today that we're looking to maintain now as part of the plan.
Primary impact to the westerly side?
To the westerly side, correct.
And no.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll open up to the public.
Good evening, Brian Haggerty, Fairview Drive, Bedminster. I'm already sworn in this matter. And I now must state that I am, although a member of the Board of Education, I'm not speaking on behalf of the Board of Education, of course. We're going to have to pass the microphone. You probably won't have to go back to that. So it's a whole different distance. So you mentioned the adjustments to the setbacks. Could you please state the east building and west building setbacks, and was that from the wall or the property?
So the setback, the setback I mentioned earlier was to the property line. So I'm going to mention on the building 2 off to the west, that's 45.3 feet, and the setback on the easterly building is 62.1 feet to the property line.
So none of your recordings over here. And the grading of Lamington Road, is that going to change, or are you keeping that pretty much at the existing grades?
No changes to the grading in Lamington Road.
Okay, so your drawings 5 and 6 show the setbacks to the easement area then, and we show the grading of Lamington Road, is that correct? I misinterpreted. There's a smaller dimension I thought in your drawing 5.
So again, with respect to Lamington Road, we're not doing significant grading in Lamington Road with the exception of what we need to do to make our tie-in for our driveway and obviously the construction of the sidewalk within that right-of-way. So that, in addition to the dedication that we're giving, so we're giving more right-of-way to the county as part of this plan. That's basically taking the right-of-way in from where it is today. I think it was roughly another 10 feet, but those are the 3 main changes within the right-of-way that are taking place. So it's the driveway add, sidewalk add, and giving them the additional dedication.
You mentioned 62.1 feet for the east building.
Right.
I believe that's the side yard setback from the east property line. I was actually asking for the front yard setback, I'm sorry.
Right. So we are going to maintain, there's a 30-foot setback. Let me just double check on the front. Yes, 30-foot setback to the front yard for both buildings.
Okay, but you have actually a little bit more than 30 feet on the east building because you count the easement there. So let's focus on the sidewalk and the point of view of a pedestrian on the sidewalk. I'll give you that it's more than 30, I believe, from the sidewalk to the east wall?
With the dedication, that's correct. If we take our setback, and that was part of the reason too with the shift, we wanted to maintain the 30-foot setback, and we do. But you are correct, with the dedication and shifting back, we've got essentially 3 more feet versus the previous plan, that there would be distance-wise screen space between the sidewalk and the building.
Okay. If I can revisit, what is the grade in front of the plaza on the street, on the sidewalk?
You know, we've been through all of this
No.
before. I don't know why he's asking these
Because I
questions
was given
again.
an answer that I believe is incorrect from the new drawings that I looked at yesterday.
He can answer the question, but I thought we've been through all of this.
Again, I didn't testify to grading, so maybe you can rephrase the question to
I'll rephrase
what I
it.
testified to.
I will rephrase the question that you did not modify drawing 6, is that correct? It shows the existing street grade, it's not modified.
We did not supply an updated grading plan with respect to the submission. We submitted a site layout plan to demonstrate the changes from the layout standpoint. However, from a grading standpoint, there may be subtle changes, and there will be. We will make adjustments as a result of the changing of the configuration of the buildings, the sidewalk and plaza in between. But fundamentally, that does not change anything from what we proposed in the original plan.
So given the plaza remains at 188 feet, I believe, that's not changed?
So the plaza right now is moved. So the plaza now is being established at essentially the first floor elevation of the building 1 to the east.
And the paved area from the previous is just modified, there was a paved area there at 188 feet? There was. I stipulate to that.
Again, I'm not clear what 188 feet means and what you're describing.
Because when I asked the question, how high was the plaza above the grade of the street in that area, I believe the record shows I was told it was 6 feet above the street, but you haven't changed drawing 6, which shows the grade there to be plus or minus a couple of feet away from 170.
What's your point, Mr. Haggerty?
My point, Mr. Blair, is that from the point of view of pedestrian on the sidewalk, how high is the soffit line? Because the question from the committee was regarding height and massing.
And the architect will talk to you about how the building has been, both buildings have been reduced in height. So why don't you wait for his testimony?
And will the architect talk about relative to the street grade? Because the street grade is going considerably.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anyone else for this witness? Lou?
I've got a question for you. When you say dedication,
Wait. Ask your question so that, one at a time, so we can hear. Okay, go ahead.
Lou DeJavine, 2460 Lamington Road, Bedminster. I've testified before, so I don't believe I need to be sworn in. I have to ask you a couple of clarifying questions regarding this plan. So from the center line of the county highway, what is your actual setback? Is it 33 feet from the center line? What is the actual setback?
From the center
Right
line.
away. Well, what was it?
The setback from the right of way, from the proposed county right of way, that setback will be 30 feet.
If I could just make a clarification there, because,
Because the road will move fast.
no, the right-of-way is a straight line through that area. But I'm looking at sheet 6 submitted by the applicant. The building on the west is 30 feet from the proposed right-of-way line. The building on the east is actually 45.6 feet from the right-of-way. Okay, and I believe Mr. Scapenes has been talking about
I'm
the
talking
minimum
about-
setback.
Right.
But if you're talking about the specific buildings, one is 30 feet, the one that's been moved back, it was further back before to begin with, and now it's a little further back to 45.6 feet.
That's what I wanted to clarify. So the west building is 30 feet from right-of-way setback, so it's 60 feet altogether?
It's
or-
63 feet from the center line of the road.
That's exactly what I'm trying to get to.
Yes.
Okay. So
Sounds like the right.
the west building is 63 feet from the center line. And what is the west building? The east building, so. Do you know what that is?
I
plus, it's plus,
It's going to be plus.
Plus 15?
plus 15, okay.
No, it's gonna be 78.6 feet. According to the plan.
I'm getting to a point, that's why I need this information.
Oh, right, okay.
Hey, guys, Rich.
78 feet.
Okay, great. So what you've done is expanded the area in the front of the east building, and that allows you to create a larger retention basin, or to put the same size retention basin in it.
We are showing the same size retention basin in this plan. And again, the shift from the previous plan takes that building, the front of the building was 3 feet closer.
Okay.
In the previous plan. It moves back 3 feet to accommodate the construction of the basin in the front.
Okay, so considering the steep grade of this property and the considerations of runoff, is it possible to keep the original size of the original drainage basin and/or increase it because you've gotten an additional few feet?
That basin, well, can we do that? Sure, we could leave the basin as the larger size, but will it modify or change the results significantly or to a point where it makes, essentially really it's economic sense to be able to put that larger in? Am I getting more, the bang for the buck that you think? We have 5,000, let's call it a few hundred square feet more reduction in impervious coverage. It's a reduction, but versus the overall project, you're talking a de minimis change in making the monster basin and reducing the runoff rate. But I understand your point, and I'll work it out with Mr. Ferrero and ensuring that we've got the maximum, the most efficient maximum.
I wanted to bring it up because as it is right now, there's still runoff off that property. So in a heavy rain, it's coming right onto the street and running down the street.
That's today.
Today.
Right.
And so you're adding more impervious coverage, you haven't reduced the parking lot or the driveway that much. So my point is, if you have a few extra feet to increase the size of the drainage basin, the retention basin, I think it would be beneficial, and I would like the board and yourself to think about keeping the larger retention basin, even if it's de minimis in your testimony.
Right.
That de minimis might mean the difference between 6 inches in the street.
Madam Chair, if I could, why don't we just let the engineers work this out? Mr. Ferrero has already indicated that he would work with our engineer to make sure that the basin was adequately sized.
I understand your point. Lou is directly across the street, and I know he's concerned about this drainage, so I think he's made his point. Yeah.
Thank you very much, I
Yeah.
appreciate it. And Mr. Lair, this is my turn to speak. Thank you.
I thought you were done, but I did.
wasn't.
Yeah, he is. Okay. Rich, you had something for Paul?
Yeah, I'm looking at this drawing, Paul, and the heavy black line is the property line that we're talking about, 45-6.
That's the proposed property line.
So due to this dedication from the county, they're changing the property line?
Correct.
Okay. The center line of the right-of-way is still, there's no dimension necessarily, but it's 5 or 10 feet south of that.
No, I don't think.
Or it's the right-of-way per the tax map, that's the current right-of-way. There's a note that says right-of-way line per the tax map, that's the old right-of-way line?
It's the right-of-way line on the tax map. The county, as application comes in, requests a right-of-way dedication, so they have 33 feet from the center line.
Okay. Do they do this property by property, or did they change it for the whole street?
Well, it's their overall plan for the street, but as applications come in, that's when they get the right-of-way.
So right now, it's a...
It can go in and out.
Yeah.
But they do the same thing in front of the Naveen property.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
That makes it a little
right.
clearer to me.
Anyone else in the public for this witness? Seeing none, we'll close this portion.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I'd like to bring John Sirocco up, please. Mr. Sirocco has already been sworn and qualified.
Mr. Sirocco, do you understand that you're still under oath?
You have to answer the question.
Do you understand that you're still under oath?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Mr. Socko, what I would like you to do is just identify for the board, which the plans have been submitted, so I don't think we need to mark them, but there is one exhibit that you're showing, so we'll mark that. But what we'd like you to do is briefly identify the changes that have been made to the architectural plans since our last hearing.
Sure. This new exhibit should be exhibit
A10,
810.
today's date, March 12, 2020.
I have copies of it here, so the board members.
There's no basic reorganization of the layout of the building. We still, in both buildings, the residential entrances are still in the back of the building. The west building still has retail entrances facing the plaza and facing Lamington Road, and both buildings still have the garage door entrances in the same location. So, from a interior layout point of view, it's still a similar layout. We have 2 egress stairs with the elevator for each of the buildings. The only difference is the reduction of the units, shorten the length of the buildings of each of the 2 buildings. From a elevation perspective, again, there was, this is PB 202. This is the west building elevation facing Lamington Road. And again, there was no significant redesign of the buildings. It's from an aesthetic perspective. We still kept similar roof lines, the long porches, the materials are all the same. Again, it was only just a reduction in the length of the building, and equally important is we lowered the ridge line of the 2 buildings. In the west building, because of the slightly lower pitch of the roof and a reduction in ceiling height in the retail space, we were able to reduce the ridge line 4 feet from the previous submission. On the east building, because we didn't reduce the height of the ground floor, we just changed the pitch as a 2-foot reduction of the height of the ridge. West building's 4 feet lower, east building's 2 feet lower. Again, just reiterating the lengths, the west building has been reduced in length. The west building has been reduced in 29 feet 4 inches. And the east building has been reduced in length by 35 feet 9 inches. But essentially, they're the same build from aesthetic, from layout point of view, they're very similar. This exhibit A10 is just a very schematic outline of the 2 buildings looking from Lamington Road. The crosshatch indicates our proposed massing of the building.
Excuse me, Mr. Sirocco, maybe if you stood on the other side, like Mr. Scapinetz did, and pointed around, the public could see it as well, because I think you're kind of standing in their way. If you get behind the board a little bit like Mr. Scapinetz did, I think they can see everything.
This is fine?
I think that'll be better for the public.
Right, so the crosshatch indicates the new building profile. The single hatch indicates the previous profile of the building, looking from Lamington Road. And as you can see, running through the calculations, there's a 22.3% reduction in the profile of the building, of the east building, and a 19.7% reduction of the profile of the west building. The unit counts were already, we already were clarified the unit count reduction. I won't go over that.
How many one-bedroom, how many two-bedroom?
Yeah, so,
Yeah, why don't you go over the whole...
yeah, sure.
What the current proposal is.
Okay. The proposed submission is 5 COA units, 5 affordable units. We have one bedroom COA affordable, 3 two-bedroom affordable, and 1 3-bedroom affordable. Whereas previously we had 6 affordable units. On the market rate side, between the two buildings, we're now proposing 6 one-bedroom market rates and 22 two-bedroom market rates. Whereas previously, we had 8 one-bedroom market rates and 26 two-bedroom market rates. I should point out...
I'm sorry, three-bedroom? Are there any three-bedroom?
No, there were no 3-bedroom market rates. There's only 1 3-bedroom affordable.
Affordable, oh, okay.
And that's required under UHAC regulations, correct?
Yes.
So that's a total of 5 affordable, 28 in the first floor, total now of 33 units.
Correct. The parking garage count, in the west building, we previously had 21 cars. We now have 14 cars in the west building parking garage. And previously in the east building, we had 35 cars. Now we have 27 cars in the parking garage.
Your plan says 12 cars in the west building. Or the plans we were sent.
I'm looking,
We have a 123 set, is that different from the
So-
219 set?
so there's a 21920 set, which I believe was the,
Okay, sorry. I'm looking at an older submittal.
what I do have to point out, those on PB 202.
Okay, sorry.
No, that's all right. On PB 202, we have the retail listed at 5,500 square feet, and that's actually incorrect. It's 4,850. On the plan, it's listed correctly. On the table, it was listed incorrectly. I just want to clarify.
Now, where did most of the parking spots get deleted? Because of the reduction in the building or the increase in the retail space? Or is it a combination?
Right. So in the west building, it was a combination. In the west building, it was a combination of a slight increase, 850 square foot increase in the retail, and it was also because of the reduction in the length of the building. On the east building, the parking reduction was almost due to the reduction in the length of the building. And that's really the summary of the changes.
Thank you.
On this thing you handed out,
Yes.
it says previous 7921 for the east building, proposed 6156, and previously 9298 on the west building and proposed 7468.
Yes.
What are those square footages referencing?
That's that is the profile, that is the profile of the building above grade,
Oh, okay.
looking from Lamington Road.
So it's the square footage.
To our point about massing.
Correct.
Right. It isn't a three-dimensional massing.
Okay.
It isn't a floor area massing.
A vertical area.
It isn't a million other
If
things.
you,
It's just,
if you cut a slice through the building vertically, that's what you'd get.
right. There's a
Okay.
lot of ways to slice and dice this. I felt this was,
And that's the exposure from the street, I guess?
yes, so if you're standing in Lamington Road, this heavy line is the grade of the building. This one line, the solid line indicates the outline of the new building, including the roof, and the dotted line indicates the area of the previously.
I have nothing further, Madam Chair.
Let me just, up to the board. Any questions on the board?
I have a question. What was the total amount that you lowered the ceiling in the west building in order to get some of that height loss?
Yeah, we reduced the retail ceiling height
To 10 feet?
to 10 feet.
What was it before? Was it
12 feet. It was a generous retail.
And that's not gonna, I mean, it shouldn't, but it's not gonna cause, because you had to lower it in the parking area too in the same building, correct?
Yeah, no, the parking was always fine. It
Right,
was,
okay.
doesn't affect.
And that's a finished ceiling height at 10 feet, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna have some area, there'll be some ductwork, there'll be areas in the retail.
That didn't change the plan, the cavity size overhead didn't change at all? It was just the ceiling height?
No, the way we frame the building out and everything, we sheet rock right to the underside.
Right.
So the 3 foot on top of the finished ceiling before the floor of the next is for what?
Yeah, well, that's steel beams. We have trusses that are typically maybe 18 to 24 inches deep, wood trusses.
Okay.
But then we have steel beams, once we get structurally into the job.
So most of that 3 feet is structure, so all mechanical has to be below that?
Sometimes we're able to fit the mechanicals within that 3 feet if it's running in the same direction as the trusses.
The 10 is not a finished ceiling.
What I'm saying is 10 feet will be most of the ceiling. There might be some areas, because ducts crossing the other way, there might be a drop here or there, so it might go down to 9 for some areas.
Did you make any, and this may be for both of you, was there any adjustment with respect to the site planning? I know we talked that there was no changes in the grading, but did you make any adjustments about how the site was treed? There were some questions in the earlier testimony about how many trees, was there an opportunity to add more trees? Any discussion or any point about increasing the number of trees?
Well, we did say we would supplement trees in that area. And Brett, maybe you can talk about it, but that area behind the parking area, we did say we would supplement.
Yeah. The area behind, once the building in the back is taken down and cleared and cleaned, yeah, that's going to be supplemented with additional trees in the back, and that's per the testimony from Joe Jaworski, talked to that. Really, the reality is I think you're getting better. I mean, what we're accomplishing here is we're maintaining natural buffer and screening that's way more mature.
I think there was some concern
corner,
raised by the board and some of the public.
Right.
About still being, although we may have reduced the ridge line of the buildings, of the structures, that we might still be able to see the rooftops from the adjoining neighborhood and perhaps additional screening with trees of appropriate size and scale or growth potential to make that more complete. And I think that was something I would hope was going to be addressed.
And again, not being here with the testimony provided by Mr. Jaworski, I can say that that's probably the root why this came up, and what we're going to do is supplement with trees here. The plantings here are going to be of a nature evergreen screening. It'll be a mix of trees, but you'll have evergreens in here and something that'll be more robust than essentially all deciduous trees that are there. So that obviously is a benefit. We have the change in grade going up in that direction. Planting them up on the hill and supplementing them up in that direction obviously has a benefit because of the impact of sight view through those trees to minimize what you see. You might see, can we completely eliminate the view? Look, you stand back there today and you look through, I can look from Lamington, I can look up and see the houses. You can see right through, but the benefit of what we do to supplement and put the right trees in there helps to mitigate that. And then certainly what we're doing here in the southwest corner, to keep the additional nature, the natural vegetation obviously is a huge plus in my mind.
Okay.
You're going to be taking down much less.
Right, much less.
Because
In
of
that southwest corner.
Because of that buffer on the
Yeah, we have to
side.
maintain a lot more.
Right.
I wanted
Yes,
to
ma'am.
return to my
Your question?
question about height. So the allowed height in this area is 35 feet, and as I calculate the building number 1 is 6 foot above that, and the other building is 10 and a half feet above that. Is that correct?
I'm not sure following.
That's correct.
Okay, so we're looking at the west building, and I'm sorry, what's your question regarding the height?
Let me just summarize the chart, because you are right. It's the maximum height, building height, is 2.5 stories, 35 feet. The existing is less than 35. Building number 1, the one on the easterly side, will be 41 feet in height. So you are right, 6 feet. The building on the west will be 45.5 feet, which is about 10 feet in height, difference in height.
Right.
You are correct.
I'm just confirming that
Right.
what I gathered was correct.
Mr. Lai, what plan were you just reading off of?
I'm reading off of the
revised
latest
dynamic.
submission that was made by Dynamic Engineering on February 20th.
Those numbers are
Thank you.
also laid out really well in Frank's memo that was on our packet.
That's what I was reading,
Yeah,
and I'm
right.
just
Those
confirming.
numbers were plugged in with a strength grid, so you could see what the change was.
I know.
Yeah, right, yeah, that's what Nick was reading from. Anyone else from the
I
board?
have one more.
Yes.
The previous picture, it looks like the lot is deeper than it is wide. Yet if you look at the satellite view, it's not even close. It's much wider than it is if you pull up the satellite view. Is that to scale? Is that really almost, is that lot deeper than it is wide? If you look, can you just hold up the satellite picture real quick? Right there? And I might be missing it. I might be looking at it wrong.
So you're looking at
I'm
that.
looking at this.
And thinking that it's wider.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There, it looks a little more
Maybe
rectangular.
it's just a little bit, yeah. But
Right.
is that to scale? Is that to
This, no,
That's-
this is spot on. This is
Okay.
based on survey. That is essentially us taking Google, the latest and greatest DEP imagery, and doing our best to represent the tax maps on there for representation. So it's a general representation here. This is accurate.
So looking at that, that's...
Right, we're gonna base our dedication to the county, so how much land we're giving to them for this, that's based on this, that's actual measurements.
With 528 along the front and 400 on the right side?
Yeah, what is it? Yeah, 528.
Wider than it is.
Right. Oh, sorry, 432 on this leg.
I think I got 499 on the right leg.
And 526.
Yeah.
My eyes are going. So, yeah.
Okay, so that is a little wider than it is.
Right, wider than,
All right.
but not as much as it looks like on that. Right, visual.
My eye.
Visual.
Okay, anyone from the board, more?
As far as the western side of the west building where you're shortening the building and you have a natural buffer now, would that be, can we make sure that that's in the approvals, that that's going to remain there as we see the picture?
Mr. Ordelius, what I would suggest in a case like that is that a limit of disturbance be established in the field. And then, whenever you have a construction project like this, there are trees that are halfway in or halfway out that limit of disturbance. During construction, you can figure out what's going on, and then you supplement to keep a naturalized buffer in that area. Because while it looks very robust there, it's probably not that thick in the field, and it probably could be beefed up. And again, they've got a lot of trees that they owe under the ordinance. And in my mind, that's an area where you would also do some supplemental planning to make sure that when you take it out, you haven't taken out the good trees that were there and you've got a couple of scraggly ones left. Because you start taking these trees out and things look different than they do in a plan view like that. So it's an area where there would likely need to be some adjustment in the field during construction to supplement that landscaped area.
And so you're going to be in charge of that?
Usually am.
Be happy.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, I will.
Paul, I just wanted to confirm that the stormwater calculations and everything that they've set forth with even the proposing of the smaller detention basin, we're still going to be good with all of that?
Well, they've never resubmitted the stormwater report. I had some comments on the original report.
Right.
We've had some meetings on it, we've discussed it. I think there's a meeting of the minds where they need to go, and that's all going to have to be redone
Okay.
to resubmit.
And it's going to be contingent, obviously, with
Yes.
approvals from your office.
Yes.
Fabulous.
Rich, did you
I
have?
have a question about the height of the building with respect to the disturbance necessary to create the underground parking. So you're at 48 and 42 or something like that, right? I just have it out.
From average grade.
Right. From the average new grade, right? If you were to
Yeah.
put, if you were to put that building on grade,
Yes.
on grade, without the subterranean garage, what would the roof heights be? Because the argument was made, I thought, by your planner once upon a time. My memory is fading. But I think the argument was made that in exchange for reducing the overall lot coverage, that kind of, not necessarily, that's the word I'm looking for, was a trade-off for increasing the height. So you could have had a lower building, not have the covered garage, and been more compliant, if not completely compliant with the height restrictions, but because you decided to put the garage underneath, that raised the buildings up.
Yes.
Can you talk about that for just a...
Yeah, we went through a lot of initial site plan, conceptual site plans for the project, and we could have easily laid out a broader footprint, larger footprints, remove more trees, have more effect on existing grading if we didn't put the parking under the building. By putting the parking under the building, we basically saved a much larger portion of the site in its existing state than if we...
And that kind of forced you to raise the height.
Yeah, that's great.
My question for you then, Frank, is that do we believe that they could have had a compliant plan with respect to coverage had they not buried the parking, so to speak?
I really didn't look at it from that perspective so far. I can take a minute and try to double check that.
My overall point here is that they're here, one of the things they're here for, never mind, the most important thing is the use, we understand. But with respect to the roof and the height of the building, it seems simply just a trade-off to me, and they may have been able to come back with a completely compliant plan by disturbing more of the natural habitat, so to speak, right?
Yeah,
and still have been compliant.
I thought what your question was before was, could the architect tell us how much of that overall height would be attributed to the floor height that the garage adds to? In other words, the first floor...
Well, if the garage it was talked about the ceiling height on that first floor being 10 feet. If we didn't have that first floor, and we had just units, 4 feet off grade, we'd be less than 35 feet.
Right.
Right? So we could potentially be compliant if there's no covered parking or garage.
I'm going to just bring Mr. Ray and Camp back up because you mentioned him, and I'm going to let him answer the question. He was already sworn.
Okay.
And qualified.
Mr. Rankin, Mr. Stern,
I do.
please state your name and address for the record.
Cray Renkamp, P.O. Box 222, Riverton, New Jersey. And you remembered the argument fairly well. The issue was, under the existing zoning, there are limits on building size. So we could actually have 7 5,000 square foot buildings and one about 2,000 square feet, each 2.5 stories tall, and they'd wind up scattered all over the site. So you'd essentially have 3 or 4 of them along the front on this side of the parking, and another 3 or 4 of them on the back side of the site. So essentially what we did was we folded the permitted amount of building from the back to the front, increased the front building by the extra story, and while we're now over the height limitation for a building, we're still under the height that a 35-foot building, 35 feet from the rear property line, it would have had in terms of distance from the center of the earth, sort of keeping things on an equal basis. So your premise, your remembering of the premise was correct. It's simply folding what the ordinance would have permitted for even commercial use to the front of the site.
Well, then I think my point is different.
Okay.
Because my point is, maybe stated a little bit more precisely, is if we did not have covered parking, or at least in one of the buildings, the building that's actually a little bit higher, but we did not cover covered parking in either one of the buildings, or the retail space.
Right.
Okay? This would be a 2.5-story building, completely compliant, less than 35 feet, with no need for a variance on height. But if we were going to do that, we would have to push that parking onto the property and expand the coverage.
Yes.
Right?
But you would
And if we'd expanded the coverage to accommodate 87 parking spots, completely on grade, could we or would we still be potentially in compliance with our coverage requirements? Or are we trading off a coverage variance for a height variance?
You're not. But the design solution wouldn't have necessarily have been these buildings with surface parking. It would have been these buildings with some parking under, and another 2.5-story building on the other side of the parking lot with some parking under, to make sure we didn't go over coverage.
That could have been higher.
You would have 2.5 stories on both sides of the
Could have
parking
been
lot.
higher, still compliant,
Exactly.
but your point about from the center of the earth, those would be higher from the center of the earth than the ones closer to the street.
Exactly. So we probably would have run into a coverage problem the way you described it, but there's a different design solution.
I'm sure I can confuse everybody, including myself.
I think frankly, you did confuse me. You pointed something out to me. Because I've written testimony with Mr. Scapinetz before, and I think we should have some clarification on this. I think he mentioned that there was no maximum lot coverage standard, or that it was only buildings. And that's not the case. I'm looking at your zone table here, and the VN zone. The maximum permitted lot coverage is 40%. The zone table is correct in that regard. But where you have maximum lot coverage, you say by buildings and canopies, you have 12.2%, 25,000 square feet. That needs to be buildings, parking, sidewalks, everything else is part of lot coverage. I'm not sure where the concept of only buildings and canopies comes from.
Are you looking at this?
I'm looking at that resubmitted sheet 5. Or sheet 3. The zone table that's on there.
So 40% is the zone, 3.9 is existing, 12.2 is what's proposed, but you're saying that 12.2 is actually higher?
I think it's probably higher. Yes.
But still less than 40.
That I don't know. Looking at it, the answer is probably. They haven't requested a variance for that.
You want to take a few minutes to calculate that? I already know I already know. So then, from an overall standpoint, the previous plan was 31.6% total impervious coverage. So that's building, sidewalks, pavement, as you mentioned, right, for total impervious. So that would be under the 40. We go down to 29.6 under this proposal.
And that includes that's after the dedication.
And that's after the dedication, correct. Okay. Right, 29.6.
But that means there's effectively about 10%, 10.3 additional impervious coverage allowance if you try to do compliant with impervious coverage.
Correct.
And so how many square feet of parking would that be?
It's going to be 10% of the lot of that lot area. So
Half an acre, just under a half acre.
So the new one, 29%?
29.6%.
And if you added that whole first floor of the two buildings, 24,000 square feet, to that coverage number by moving it outside, would you still be less than 40?
I don't know. If you move,
The numerator in your, what's the numerator in your 29%?
Well, it's going to be more. Because
Right, the number's gonna grow by 24,000
Because under it's 208, so basically after the dedication, it's 209,000 square feet. So 20,900 is essentially the limit of additional impervious.
Okay.
Okay? I think we can open it up to the public. I see anybody? Attorney, want to come up?
You want some close? Brian Haggerty, Haggerty. Speaking of the height from the earth, and slice through the building, that revisits my earlier question, I think, and I'm indifferent which of the four you answered it. I was looking at the roof soffit line because I think you've shown in the renderings that the roof moving away has an artistic effect of being away. But the roof soffit line is fixed. Is it correct that the roof soffit lines are approximately 33 feet above the ground floor elevation for each building, and the dimension thread should be on the right-hand side of that drawing?
The soffit is 20 feet above the first floor elevation in both buildings.
Thank you. So that would make it approximately 208 feet, which is 20 plus 188 for the east building, and 221 for the west building.
Yes, I agree with the west building, 221, and on the east building, it's going to take me a minute. The east building will be 208.
Mr. Happy, I've given you my microphone over here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And can you tell us, or perhaps the civil engineer can reiterate, what is the grade of the sidewalk on Lamington Road? And you can also offer the distance that the sidewalk is from the soffit line that faces Lamington Road on the easterly edge of the buildings. So the east face that didn't move, what is the height then of that soffit above the sidewalk, which, aside from anything else, you're asking for variances here, and you can say that's not actually covered in the zoning ordinance, but it goes directly to the height and the massing of the buildings and the perception and all these discussions we had about renderings.
Right. The grading isn't shown on this site plan.
It's on civil sheet 6.
Yeah, I know. I don't have that. So, but I should just point out that the heights that you're asking us to clarify are not zoning height, are not ordinance required.
I stipulated to that.
Okay, and...
I stipulate to that. I'm saying you're asking for variances.
I just want to point out that I never made any reference to an attempt to have the roofs pitched back to soften the sight lines. That was something I never stated.
Would you rather go with the ridge line then than with the soffit line for the height difference?
No, I'm just clarifying that what you're asking in the context of our application.
I was sure there was testimony about roof lines. Okay.
So I just need help with the grading.
Would you think that it could be at the easterly side of the south facade of the east building, approximately 168 feet?
Okay.
176?
Yeah, so the sidewalk,
Wouldn't that be at the western end of the west building? It's 176?
the sidewalk in front of the plaza is at 176.
Which sheet is that?
That's not on my drawing.
That drawing that you're looking at right there.
Oh, I'm sorry, this is PB 202. And what we're saying is the sidewalk in front of the plaza is 176, and we're saying the soffit line is at 221. And I can't do the math.
The west building?
That's the west building. And then the soffit line on the east building, we said was, was 208. And the,
Okay, can we, if I may, can we do
Yeah.
one at a time? The soffit line of the east building at the east edge with the point of the sidewalk, the plaza, and the eastern edge of the west building. I think it's going to be easier for everybody to understand. We do one at a time.
It's fine if Mr. Chapman says the elevation of the sidewalk at the east end of the east building, and then that's whatever other.
The elevation of the sidewalk at the east end of the east building, so, which is,
well,
I should point to it on the exhibit.
that would be this.
Right, that is
Do
169.
you mind, can I mark that?
Yeah, 169.
That's the sidewalk.
That's at the sidewalk at the corner, right.
That's 169. Okay.
That's 169 versus a roof ridge of soffit of 208.
Right.
And the ridge is, you know what the ridge is. Thank you. And we've discussed the plaza, which is at the 188.
176.
176 is the sidewalk,
Yeah, a little bit further.
and the soffit is 220.
No, the east, there's no soffit to the plaza. The soffit at the east end of the west building, I measured off for setbacks and building widths and came up with maybe I made a mistake, I came up with the same number you did for the east end of the east building. But for the plaza, I came up with something around 172, and for the east edge of the east building, I came up with 173. 176 doesn't occur till the west edge of the west building from my review of your plans.
There's too many numbers.
Okay, I agree. I agree.
I think
We'll step back.
what you have to, I think what you should do is explain to us what height you like to see clarified.
The height from the sidewalk to the soffit line for each building at the eastern end, and the height from the sidewalk to the plaza.
Okay, so the eastern end of each building, just so you know, is, just so everyone understands, is the more extreme end. It isn't the average, it's not the lowest soffit height, it's going to be the highest soffit height. So in the east building, that's 208 minus 169, right? That's 9, so that's 39 feet. On the eastern edge of the western building, it's 221 versus 176.
Correct.
So that's 45 feet.
And the plaza?
And
Let's
plaza-
just get a clarification on the plaza. Is the plaza the open area behind next to the commercial, or is it the amenity plaza?
I'm referring to the amenity plaza in between because I can't see that behind from the street. I'm going by what we see from the street.
So what is this elevation of the amenity plaza?
So, again, be 100% clear, we were talking about sidewalk elevations. Now we're moving into the site and asking what the elevation is of the plaza?
Yes.
Well, the comparison, so both.
Well,
I need one, what's the one thing, you're looking for the elevation of the plaza on that plan between the buildings? I'll point to it.
Yes, the one with the pergola.
You're looking for the elevation at this location right here, from the
Yes,
sidewalk.
and the sidewalk,
And the sidewalk out in front.
yes, for the differential.
We had 176 over
Right, I just wanted to, I'm just looking at reference points in the grading plan versus here. So the elevation of the sidewalk in front of the plaza is 174. It's about a 2-foot differential from the point at the easterly end of the western building. The sidewalk goes up to the town.
Right.
Okay, 172. The elevation of the plaza, again, we're gonna stay relative to the grades, because we're holding essentially first floor grades, because we're grading the same way up into the driveway. So we're gonna say that the elevation there is going to be at about 188.
So that's a 14
Is the ground level, the pavers of the plaza, 188.
Thank you.
That's 14 foot.
Okay, I thought I had misunderstood something. I had a lesser height, I had been told earlier, so thank you for clarifying. Sure. 14 feet. And the planner didn't actually introduce anything about the height and massing and relativity, so I'm going to drop that. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, I promise you a little bit less technical, but in these two buildings, was there any opportunity, in addition to, you mentioned lowering the retail ceiling height, was there any opportunity for lowering the ceiling heights of either the units or the parking garage or the other interior structural areas?
Yeah, so the residential apartment ceiling height is 9 foot. That's market standard. Anything lower than that for the type of client they're trying to bring here wouldn't work. So we couldn't reduce that. Structurally, we know what we need, to get the building to stand up, basically. So we couldn't reduce there. And the parking garage in the east building is kept to a minimum height that we feel we need. Whereas the parking garage in the west building has a little bit more generous height than what's needed, but that's because the retail 10-foot height is dictating that height.
And what are the heights for the two parking garage areas?
Well, in the west building, it's a 10-foot ceiling height in the parking garage, which is more than what we need. But it's what we need for the retail. And in the east building, it's, didn't have it mentioned. It's 12'6" minus roughly 3 foot for construction. It's 9'6". It's a little bit lower than the west building.
Okay. In your experience on lowering these two buildings by 4 feet and 2 feet respectively, is that a significant reduction in height?
I'm not sure your question.
Is that, in your experience as an architect, in having plans before zoning boards or planning boards?
What's the hypothetical you're asking? You're asking them to lower the building by 4 feet?
I'm asking if it's a significant reduction in height.
Well, is 4 feet or 12 feet? What's the question? These are the buildings that we're showing. What are you asking?
I'm asking if they...
I think there's an objection, but I think that, maybe the questioner could confirm, but I think the question was, are the 4 feet and 2 foot reductions that have been proposed significant reduction?
Yes, that is what I asked.
And I think that's a legitimate
I didn't interpret it that way. I think he just came out and said, if we reduce these buildings by 4 feet, would you consider that to be significant?
I didn't mean that, and I didn't say that.
Well, then what are you actually asking?
I'm asking what the attorney mentioned, is the 4 feet and 2 feet reduction respectively significant decreases in height?
Well, let me answer two ways. From an aesthetic point of view, I don't believe there's significant reductions. I believe that we still keep the quality of the building that we're trying to convey here, of the aesthetics of the building. From a zoning perspective, I think it's very significant.
Could you explain that?
Yeah, when you reduce the height 4 feet, when there's a 35-foot height limitation, that's significant.
Okay, so you mean in terms of the height limitation?
From a strictly zoning ordinance perspective, 2 feet and 4 feet very significant. From an aesthetic perspective, I don't believe it diminishes the aesthetic quality of the building.
Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
Anyone else in the public? Yes, please, come up.
As a follow-up to that last question, what was the pitch before and what is the pitch now?
Yes, so, well, since I'm on this drawing, we kept the pitch of the reverse gables the same. We didn't want to reduce those pitches. We felt that was kind of significant. But we did reduce the eave of those reverse gables down. So this living room or bedroom, whatever it is going to have a little clip ceiling in it. So these pitches stayed the same. These side pitches, the east and the west roofs stayed the same. What we did is we just tilted this long roof back.
So from the gable, basically, to the ridge is what you reduced?
Yeah, we changed, you could actually see it here, we slightly reduced the pitch.
Page is that one?
This is PB 203.
Yeah. Okay.
So you could see a slight, maybe it's, let me see.
Like 4 and 12 now, it was 5 and 12 before?
Yeah, something like that, yeah. We didn't use exact framers dimensions, we just used what we had to do to get to.
George, you have a question?
Well, I had a question for, not for this gentleman, but for Tom and Trace.
Oh, sure, uh-huh.
So the question is, Frank and Tom and Paul, what options are available to ensure that the applicant doesn't come back and ask for additional buildings on the property or to expand? You know, they've talked about the big buffer index, so how do we protect that buffer in perpetuity?
Let Tom think about that.
Well, sort of two questions, George. Any enlargement of the D variance requires a new D variance to change it. So with respect to adding buildings, that would be an amendment to the use variance that comes back to the zoning, you sitting as zoning board about amendments to the D variance and to prove the negative, affirmative and negative criteria. On the preservation of the rear yard, Paul's suggestion sounds like it makes a lot of sense, that the certain disturbance that takes place for the development, and if you remember, the ordinance has a number of trees replanting requirement that is applicable, and Paul will require those trees to be planted in appropriate locations on the property. That becomes the yard of that site plan and use variance. If you wanted to, perhaps we could ask the applicant to put it in a conservation easement for the...
Yeah, I think that would be
protection.
the right thing to do.
You're saying that any modification, any site plan modification for perpetuity, because it got a use variance, they'd have to come back here for it?
Yes, they would. That's
Yeah.
my legal opinion, I'm sticking with it.
Yeah, right.
I think,
Of course, I may die someday.
I think a conservation easement would be a great thing.
Fighting that.
If the board were to consider, you know, all the variances, I think that would be a great thing for the applicant to do.
the conservation easement?
Yeah, for the portion that they're saying they're never gonna build on.
That's fine.
Okay. Anyone else from the public? Yes. Yes. We interrupted you. Come on up.
My name is Judy Krillman. I live at 120 Fairview
Have
Drive.
you been sworn in before?
I have,
You
way
In the back. Okay.
back.
In the way back.
Right, still counts. My question is just regarding, Mr. Travellini was asking about what happens if the parking below was removed and put out, and would that get rid of all these variance requirements? And because my concern, one of my concerns related to this is the appearance. I mean, that area of Bedminster, this seems to be quite different, what they're proposing, than everything else in that, I don't know if it's considered historical or not, but what I would call historical, old Bedminster. This seems to change it, 10 feet above the requirement, maybe for a little house. Well, that would still be a lot, but this is two long buildings, and one's going to be 10 feet above, and one's going to be 5. And so I lost it in the math. And they were talking about, Mr. Travellini was saying, if you took all of these parking spaces underneath and you moved them out, and therefore we could lower the roofs to, by that degree, so it's within the 35 feet, at least it would have some lesser impact driving through Old Bedminster and what that whole character looks like. And I just didn't understand the answer, because then they started talking about huge numbers and I lost it. If you took all those parking spaces, and I think there's 41, something?
27 or 40.
Yeah, something like that. If you put them out, would there be too many? Would that violate the impervious coverage? And you may have gotten an answer, but I just didn't understand it. Yes, it would have been violated, that's why it wasn't considered.
So then you have to ask.
The question.
That's what I'm asking.
You don't ask the board.
I wasn't asking the board, no one was, I'm sorry. That's the question I was asking, so no one was confused about where I was coming from.
If I might respond, and to the best of my recollection, is that it will exceed the 40%. And it would be about half an acre more of disturbed area that you'd have to tear down trees to put parking.
Okay, so those 41 extra spaces would go over the 40% then?
Correct.
Okay, that's what I was
That's what
confused
recall.
about. Well-
Mr. Scapanetti, my
The basic math we did,
Right,
yes,
right.
takes us over that, but the more important thing is that it forces us to now disturb more of the land in order to provide those parking spaces. We're now grading and developing further in, closer to the residential properties in the rear.
Thank you.
We're doing now.
That's what I wanted to clarify. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Can I just clarify that a little bit further? Because the ordinance does have a somewhat unique tiered coverage requirement, so that size of this lot over an acre is permitted 40% coverage. If you cut up into 4 or 5 or 6 lots, all of a sudden you're under the size where you get 50% coverage. So the entire site, if subdivided for a bunch of 5,000 square foot buildings and surface parking, could have 50% coverage over the entire site because of that.
And
Still
that's-
doesn't tell you the answer to the question, would you exceed the 50% if you put it all on the ground? I don't think it's that hard to figure out. If we just look at the plan, you can measure what
Ultimately,
the area of those
the point
parking
was,
spaces.
it's either a trade-off, it's either a variance for height, which is still there, or a variance for coverage. Pick your poison.
The lesser of two.
Yeah, yeah.
If we stick with the 33, the data variance for the amount of units, density too, right?
Correct.
There is no
It's not like
there's-
density, but they do need a D variance for the use of this building for all apartments and probably for a building with so many apartments in it.
But we don't have a density standard that uses the word density, so you don't need a variance from that standard.
But it's a D variance, as opposed to coverage, which is, generally speaking, C variance.
Anyone else from the public that would like to? Yes, Mr. Hyder?
These are questions for testimony, because he's done his question.
I had a
We can
question
go
on the
into
new
comments?
testimony that was, I'll ask, is it in order?
Why
On
don't
the
you
new
do both?
testimony.
Just ask your questions, then do your testimony.
I have two questions on the new testimonies introduced about the roof, and the gateways and the pitch.
They're both
Which is,
now.
did you bring that to the Historic Preservation Committee, and have they seen this revised
No.
elevation?
No, you have not.
But
We will.
You will. So they will need approval.
So that, I thought I had heard earlier there was already an approval of a certificate.
There was on the old application. I don't want to say it.
What happened is that they said, go forth to the planning board, we like what you have, but we want you to come back for colors and materials. That was what they told us.
So it wasn't officially issued, but it was basically
Go
technicalities.
ahead.
It was
Yes.
technicalities. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Those are my two questions.
And why don't we go ahead, Mr. Haggerty, and give testimony? I'm sure you have testimony to...
Or
No,
comment.
sir, I do not. I'm done with my questions. I have no testimony.
Okay, that's-
I have too much testimony already.
Well, that's your questioning.
I have nothing.
Okay. Is there anyone
We
who
heard that
wants to
about
make a comment? Okay, then we'll close that portion. Would you like to summarize, Mr. Lair?
No.
No?
Wise decision.
Mr. President, would you like to give us some answers?
Yeah, just briefly. Like the board to keep in mind with all the testimony we've heard, height variances and different specs on the project, if this is a use variance, or use is not permitted in this area, just keep that in mind when you're making your decision. And something my client just brought up right now was the issue about the retail space, and we'd ask that the board consider a condition on the retail space there not be a restaurant retail space too, which would require more parking spaces.
Paul, is there a condition on these parking spaces?
There are different parking standards
Yes.
for different uses.
Right.
The proposal is based on 225, one parking space for every 225 square feet, so it would have to be a use that falls within that. Now, if they had a restaurant and it was, and the seating is based on the number of seats,
Correct.
and the seats relate to the same number of parking spaces, then they could do that.
Mhm.
But the fundamental issue is there are a fixed number of parking spaces for the non-residential use. Any non-residential use that fills whatever space can't have a parking demand of more than those number of spaces.
That's left over from
So
the
it
residential.
could be, a gross example is you could have a restaurant but only 2 seats. Obviously, that's not our standard, but the number of seats would back into the number of parking spaces available.
And then Mr. Perret gets checked on changing CO and changing occupancy.
Anytime there's an occupancy, it gets reviewed by the zoning officer and I. And we look, and it's parking is the first thing we look at.
And just like the board to consider the area and consider how this use is not permitted for a reason because it's too large and we don't believe that the reduction in size is significant enough to warrant the variances requested.
Thank you. All right, is there any board member that would like to make a statement? Deliberate what we have heard. We've had a lot of testimony. Well, we've had a considerable change in the plan. This property's been empty for a very long time. The buildings that are there are in disrepair. It was never intended for this property to be empty. It was intended to be developed. It's part of the village. It's a little larger lot than we are used to seeing in the village. So obviously, there would be more development than we would normally see. We have offered to us a 200-foot plus buffer, which is unheard of, quite frankly, when you have a 35-foot setback. As George has said, perhaps a conservation easement would be a good idea, which the applicant has also agreed to. think this will give our village good utilization. It'll give us a boost in what it needs. And we also have something that we don't have in Bedminster, which is some apartments. It gives us our COA requirements. And it offers the apartments that we can use for young people that would like to stay and get started, and perhaps older people that might want to downscale. So with the changes that have been made here, I would be in favor of this application. Anyone else has anything to say?
Well, I think it's a big improvement over the first draft, and I think the applicants worked very hard to work with this.
I agree.
That's appreciated from this seat anyway.
Well, I would like to say I still feel the requirements that we have been established for a long time to keep the area looking kind of rural. And I think the variance requests are kind of severe. And so it would violate what I think we really want for the neighborhood. So I would be opposed to, despite the fact that this is a much improved plan, B, a very difficult lot to deal with, I would be opposed to approving the plan.
Anyone else?
I think the applicant made an admirable effort to reduce the scale, size, the density, the massing here to make it more suitable for this site and in our main street. I think I'm not sure what the conditions that we are talking about would include, but I think additional trees with particular size and growth potential to further enhance the screening from neighborhoods beyond and to either side is important. I think we should be preserving the side yard on the western end. I think we should stipulate to the fact that that retention basin would not get any smaller with Paul's guidance and approval, of course. I think the conservation easement is a great idea. Again, I think this is very difficult, but overall, I believe times are changing. I think the needs for people, housing needs for people have changed dramatically, even over just the past 25 years that my family has grown up here in Bedminster. There's more and more nuclear families. The traditional kind of Donna Reed household is slowly but surely shrinking. I think this addresses, as Carol said, I think this addresses some of those needs in a very positive way. I think it's a beautiful design. Disappointed Mr. Sirocco didn't come back with a rendering tonight, but I'm in favor of the project, especially with the reductions.
Anyone else?
I think as an applicant who has listened to some of our concerns and gone a long way to addressing them, there were some things that I really liked in the initial plan, although we all had some concerns about the building massing. The buffer in the back, I think, is fabulous, and if we can keep that as a conservation easement. The screening on the western edge, I think, goes a long way to breaking up the sight line of these buildings as you come down the street. And the setbacks, with a 5-foot setback, to see setbacks that are 45 and 200 feet, I think goes a long way to showing me that the applicant understands what we're looking for in town, even if you can't please everyone. And so I think it's an application that addresses some of the things we've been looking for to put in town.
So Tom?
Sounds like there's a motion to approve the D variances any key variances that are needed, even if contested by the parties. The steep variances and the preliminary and final site plan with the conditions that the board members just talked about and Paul and Clarence report, standard conditions.
APC again.
Yes, HBC, getting approval of the revised design and the materials and architectural details, and all other governmental approvals. And it will include the conservation easement and the planting debris approvals, details and field determined and approved by the township engineer. As we always say, if there's any dispute between them and the township engineer, it comes back to the board for final determination. And that's what I had.
Is there a way that we can, if there's an opportunity to have less runoff into the street, like increasing the size of that retention basin, I think we should take advantage of it? If that's not material?
Well, I think there's a ways to go on the stormwater design. I think ultimately it will be decreasing the flows. I don't see it getting any smaller than it is now based on some of the comments that I've made. I think the difference in the impervious surface, is not proportional to the decrease in the size of the detention basin. It would make a very marginal difference in the detention basin. So,
There was a change that I remember, Paul, where they were going to deal with the driveway and its storm drains on the driveway to better reduce surface flow that could take place from the uphill driveway onto the right.
We're talking about trench drains.
yeah,
Potentially a trench drain, although they're going to work on that whole concept of trench drains.
Yes.
Make it work better. They'll also probably have to check out that storm drain in the county road to make sure it's not clogged. But those are the kind of details that's all.
I want to be clear on your point, Rich. Paul, are you saying that you may reduce the stormwater plan because they have reduced the building size?
I frankly don't see that it would create much of a reduction in the size of the stormwater system.
Okay,
by reducing it the way they did.
So then, why don't we just say that it can't be reduced from the original plan?
Because I'm not sure the original plan is the right size. Because we have to go through some additional...
It would be bigger, but not small?
Yes.
Okay.
It wouldn't be any worse than what it was in the original plan. It's what I'm kind of
Well,
looking
what you
for
got
here.
now? We only want to either, right? We
It should be,
want more.
they reduced the coverage with the expectation that there would be less of a runoff issue and less runoff not being contained by the retention basin because they reduced the coverage.
Right. That's correct. What I can tell you is this from a design standard perspective. Okay, maybe this is the best way to put it. For the 100-year storm, you have to reduce the peak flow by 20% from the existing condition. Okay, so the target they have to hit is the same, regardless of how much impervious surface they have on the property. They don't get to discharge more, for example, because they reduced the size of the impervious surface.
So you're designing it just for that 100-year storm?
For the reduction that's associated with the 100 years, so that's part of the residential set improvement.
Okay.
And other storm events too.
Yeah, there's smaller ones other than that as well. You have to look at the 210 and the 100-year storm.
I mean, the spirit of what he's saying is, we want extra capacity as opposed to less capacity.
I think I heard that.
Or the same. I want extra capacity, not the same capacity.
All right, I think we need a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, Janine.
Mr. Trettelini?
Aye.
Mr. Shekoff?
No.
Mr. Rodelius?
Aye.
Mr. Leonard?
Aye.
Mr. Zupnik?
Aye.
Ms. Arabana?
Aye.
Chairwoman Gotcha?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Thank you for your patience.
You're,
Thank you for yours.
yeah, thank you. And good luck to your project.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
we doing Rylocate? Or they're not even complete?
Rylocate is not complete yet. They need to resubmit. I spoke to the engineer today, and he's getting closer.
Was there a motion to adjourn? Wait, you got something?
No, I just wanted to hear who's...
Oh, okay, well, I'm moving to adjourn.
Anna is moving. Scott, you're... I'm out.
I'll second it, baby.
And we're adjourned.
We're adjourned.
Went down.
Taking.